without further ado, please welcome Blake Strode.
Good afternoon. I don't know why they made me go after all these preachers. I really don't. I'm not a preacher. I will do my best. There we are. Now I can hear myself. It's really great to be here with you, here in Arkansas with all of you. And if you'll permit me, I'd like to briefly share a story, depart a little bit from I hope my slides have been pulled up somewhere. But I want to depart a little bit from my prepared remarks anyway and share a story with you that I was not going to tell today, but something about being here the last hour made me want to share, so I hope you will have some patience with me. My partner and I, Cole, who's here with me today, we spent the last couple of days in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. And we had a pretty good time, my first time in that small town, sort of hanging out. On Thursday night, we were at a small bar, and we left to go back to the car. We'd been hanging out for a few hours, had a couple of drinks, meeting people, nothing unusual. And we were walking to our car and standing next to the car, having a conversation about who was going to drive. And a Eureka Springs police officer pulled up, and he rolled down the window, and he said, "You're not going to drive drunk, are you?" I said, "No, officer, we wouldn't do that." And he said, "Well, you look like you're swaying." And I said, "No, I'm not." Now, I'd had about 2.5 drinks in 2.5 hours. That was it. So not only was I not drunk, I was nowhere near drunk. And the second he pulled up, I was about as sober as I've been in my life. And so long story short, he pulls over, he gets out, he comes over. And he not only refused to let us get in the car, he refused to let us walk away. He detained us on the side of this road for about 25 minutes and said our options were to wait there with him, or he said, "I'm doing you a favor by not arresting you for DUI or public intoxication." Now, I'm not the best lawyer in the world. I am a lawyer, but I'm not the best lawyer in the world. But I know to have a DUI, you got to be driving. Right, Judge? I'm right about that, right? And to be convicted for public intoxication, I believe you have to make some sort of disruption, be in someone's way, be a danger to yourself or someone else. There you go, sir. So I'm having this back and forth with this officer. And then Cole looks at me and says, "I guess you're going to have something to talk about on Saturday." And I sort of laughed. And the officer said, "So you're speaking, sir, Saturday?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Where are you speaking?" I said, "Little Rock." He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Law enforcement officers who don't understand the constitutional limits of their authority and abuse their citizens." Now, here's the thing. I did say that. I wouldn't lie with all these pastors in the room. I did say that. But here's the thing. A, I'm not actually talking about that. Sorry. B, you heard Reverend Blackman talk about the talk mothers have with their sons. My mother would not have been happy that I was talking that much to this officer. I can tell you she wouldn't. But when I say I'm happy to be here in this place with you all today in Arkansas, that's what I mean. I really am happy to be with this group of people today in Arkansas. So that's just a little aside, but I digress. Are my slides up here somewhere? Perfect. Great. Okay. So the real reason I came down here from St. Louis, Missouri, to talk to you all today is because I need your help. And the reason I need your help is because we're in a crisis. And I want to tell you a little bit what that crisis looks like. In my hometown, every year, thousands of people are thrown into cages. The vast majority of those people are poor. The vast majority of those people are black. Many of them have not been convicted of anything and should be presumed innocent under the law. And most of them hail from communities that suffer from generational divestment, undereducation, under resourcing, underemployment, and over-policing. And this in a state that is still scarred by its original sin of the systematic enslavement of African peoples and their descendants. And this is what they tell us is public safety. That sound familiar to anyone? So, the good news is that we don't have to do things this way. We really don't. There is an alternative. In fact, there are many alternatives. And that's really what I'd like to talk to you a little bit about. But before I do that, I want to share just a little more information about me so you know who's talking to you. First and foremost, I am a Razorback. So, you know, I want you to feel that and know you can trust me. I came to this state in 2005 to attend the University of Arkansas. I was there 4 years, played some tennis there, among other things. Then I played a little tennis after undergrad and went to law school. And I returned to my hometown of St. Louis, Missouri, after U of A, after tennis, after law school. And a big part of the reason that I returned to the St. Louis area was this thing called Ferguson. I wasn't home when Ferguson was unfolding. But this was a clash between state power and black-led resistance. This was an explosion of long-simmering tensions over the criminalization of poverty and state violence against poor people and black people in the region. And I came back to St. Louis to do civil rights work at Arch City Defenders, an organization whose very mission was combating the criminalization of poverty and state violence against poor people and people of color in the region. And at that point, Arch City had been representing hundreds of people in these for-profit, revenue-generating, abusive courts all across the region for many years, for several years at that point. And we continue that work, and we've continued building on that, helping our clients navigate these abusive and unjust and systemically racist systems in the region. However, we also knew that the problems we saw in places like Ferguson weren't really about those cities. It was about something much more fundamental. It was about poverty and racism, and it was about a conception of public safety that was really harmful. Right. So part of what we've done and part of what we've embarked on is this project of redefining public safety and reimagining public safety as community well-being. And we've done this in coalition with many partners. These are some more the Missourians Organizing for Reform and Empowerment, Action St. Louis, Organization for Black Struggle, and CAPCAR, which stands for Coalition Against Police Crimes and Repression. And our challenge has been, remains, that we have this status quo notion, of public safety, of arrest and incarcerate, that we've become so comfortable with caging our fellow human beings en masse more and more and more. And when we run out of resources to do that and run out of capacity to do that, we hire more police, we build more jails, we create more space. And that's where we are. That's this cycle we've been in forever. And this is what it looks like from a budgetary perspective. So this is the city of St. Louis, but it could be any city in America. In the city of St. Louis, about 63% of the general fund budget goes toward public safety, and that's public safety very narrowly defined. So it's police, courts, jails. In fact, very specifically, 87% of that 63 are police, prosecution, and jails. The majority of money, public investment, coming out of our general fund budget is going to those three things. Meanwhile, you see 9% on streets, 7.8 public services, 4.5 parks. And then this, if you can even see, you probably can't even see, That tiny sliver at the top, 0.3%, health and human services. Now that encompasses homeless services in the city of St. Louis, which gets $0. $0 for homeless services in the city of St. Louis, while 63% goes to public safety. So the question that this raises for me is, what does it look like when the majority of funding, when the systems, the institutions we've invested in to bring us a collective sense of security and well-being are the very systems that are destabilizing our communities and stripping out vital human resources that we need to be whole and well? What does that look like? And the answer is, this is what it looks like. Now, we got cut off a little bit at the top, but the title of this is World Incarceration Rates, if every state were a nation. Okay, and this is from prisonpolicy.org. If you haven't ever gone to that resource, there's tons of information there. And this bar graph goes for much, much further than this. This is about the first 40 entries. All the ones in gray are states. The bars in orange are the only countries there. So you can see here, the only countries, the top, United States of America, followed by our dear friends and competitors, El Salvador and Turkmenistan. Down there is the next two. And all the rest of these are states. That second red bar is my home state of Missouri. And the top there, coming in at number 6, state of Arkansas. This is what it looks like from a global perspective. So when we say that this is unprecedented and without comparison, this is what we mean. Looking at it another way, this is just isolating Arkansas and the NATO countries. Those countries we think we are so much like. We're in the Western developed world. We have all of these democratic values, and these are our partners. And look at how many of our citizens we are caging as opposed to the rest of the world. So this is what a crisis looks like. This is also what a crisis looks like. This is one of our clients, Kiana, and our daughter, Royal, who's adorable. She's in 8th grade now. Fortunately, she's a frequent visitor to our office. And Kiana started driving. Reverend Blackman talked a little bit about our political structure with all the municipalities in St. Louis County. Kiana, like many 16-year-olds, started driving at 16, and she also, not that unusual, started getting tickets at 16. But for her, and these were run-of-the-mill tickets, we're talking about speeding, maybe a failure to register, a busted tail light, or no insurance, something like that. From those types of offenses, she wound up in a years-long cycle of court debts she couldn't pay, arrest warrants, and jail that literally pulled her out of her life and into jail cells for months out of her life, away from her daughter, not able to work, not able to attend school, which she was, having to drop out, destroyed her life over traffic tickets. And now Kiana's doing much better. By the way, this was exacerbated by the fact that she had an extended period of homelessness where she was living out of her vehicle with her daughter. And that led to even more contact with law enforcement, even more traffic tickets. I'm happy to say Kiana's doing much better now. She's permanently housed. She actually works at Arch City Defenders as a paralegal and civil advocate. And Royal's also doing great. And Kiana's a plaintiff in a civil rights lawsuit against one of the cities that did this to her, that jailed her, in that case for about a month in total over unpaid traffic tickets. Jailed her because of her poverty. But this is one of the faces of this crisis. Daniel is another one of those faces. Daniel is another client. Daniel also experienced long periods of homelessness. He also is chronically mentally ill, including a diagnosis of schizophrenia for which he receives prescription medication regularly. During one of these periods of being unhoused, living on the streets in St. Louis, during one of his frequent contacts with law enforcement, he wound up from that contact in the hospital with severe injuries, and shortly thereafter was taken to the city jail where he stayed for 5 months on a supposed out-of-state extradition warrant but with no hearing, no process, no nothing happened, wasn't even taken to court, and there were no charges of any sort. At the end of 5 months, he wrote his own habeas petition, thank you, which for the non-lawyers is just a petition for release. And that's what triggered his release the first time. A few months later, they did it again. He went back again on a supposed extradition warrant, sat there for 3 months, no process, no extradition, no charge, no hearing, and he was let out again. I saw Daniel about, the last time was probably 3 or 4 weeks ago when I was driving through town, and he also was doing better than when I'd seen him before. He's working for something called the Downtown STL Partnership, cleaning streets and storefronts in the downtown area, and he was really excited because he'd just gotten a car with some proceeds from a lawsuit. And yesterday, as I was driving down here, I heard that he'd been arrested again, and this time he was being extradited out of state to face some charges that could land him in prison for a good period of time. And so he has been and remains another one of the faces of this crisis. This is the Workhouse Jail. This is a medium security institution in the city of St. Louis. It's called the Workhouse, if you can believe that. Not unlike many local jails, 90 to 98% of the people in this facility are pretrial. They haven't been convicted of anything, and they just can't afford the cash bond to get out. They hold about 1,200. Right now it's at half capacity, half full. And in November of last year, we, our city defenders, on behalf of 7 plaintiffs, filed a class action lawsuit against the city for conditions in this jail, which have been infamous for decades. I mean, rodent and insect infestations, abuse by jail guards, overflowing sewage, mold, you name it, they've got it. And this has been going on for decades. This year, we also launched a campaign to close the workhouse in collaboration with some of the same partners I already mentioned, as well as the Bail Project St. Louis, which the Bail Project is a national bail fund with sites around the country, and one of the first ones is in St. Louis, and they're part of this coalition as well. And just this week, just 2 days ago, we released this report, a plan to close the workhouse and promote a new vision for St. Louis. And in this report is a framework for re-envisioning public safety and re-envisioning public safety investment. And this is basically what it looks like. You know, this is what I've been sort of describing as the arrest and incarcerate model: jails, police, courts, handcuffs. And we want to shift from that to a model of public safety as community well-being, affordable housing, health, education, opportunity. And so we're building on the words of Dr. Cornel West when he says, "Justice is what love looks like in public." And we take that very seriously and believe that creating this sort of opportunity and community well-being is critical to actually achieving public safety. So there are 4 pillars in this particular framework. The first is safe and affordable housing for everyone. And we know how important this is. It's no coincidence that both Kiana's and Daniel's stories both included these periods of homelessness. You can look at any budget like the one I showed you in the city of St. Louis and see that if you're putting all of your money, all of your investment into one institution, that is the police, it is highly likely that the people that someone on the streets, that an unhoused person is going to come into contact with, will be the police. That's what you've invested in. You haven't sent out social workers. You haven't sent out crisis interveners. You haven't sent out substance abuse experts. You've sent out people with handcuffs and badges and guns, and that's who they come into contact with. So we have to invest in affordable housing for all. We have to make sure that people have spaces from which they can be rooted and build lives of dignity and opportunity. Second, mental health care, or really health care more generally, health and well-being more generally, investing in services, treatments, programs that actually allow people to be their best whole selves. People who are in crisis, who are unwell, they need services. They need treatment. They need support. They don't need a jail cell. And in fact, when you put them in a jail cell, that only deepens the problem. It only makes it worse. Right. So we have to shift our thinking around what actually is helping people, what actually is leading toward public safety. Third, economic and educational opportunities, meaning public schools, after-school programs, secondary education, job training programs, community college, all things that we know. Someone said earlier today, we know the solutions. Very true. None of this is rocket science. We've known this a long time. These are all things that we know are the best ways of reducing crime. I put crime in quotes because crime is whatever we decide it is at any given moment. But reduce crime and improve public safety. The best way of doing that is investing in economic and educational opportunities. And then lastly, community spaces that are accessible, that are free, that are open to all. We need to be building community, not building cages. So if we do this, this is what that budget might look like. You still have some money for public safety. You have public defenders, streets and parks, affordable housing, community-based mental health, community college, employment and training program, and community spaces. So this is the vision that we need to move toward to get away from this reliance on abusive and racist systems that are throwing human beings in cages. So what can you do? What can you do today, tomorrow, next week, next month, for years to come? Well, you can engage your families, friends, professional networks, neighborhoods, and conversations around alternatives to police and jails. Demand accountability and transparency from public officials and law enforcement. Educate yourself and others about the current public safety model and alternatives to that model. Mobilize. We heard a lot of great work that's being done right here in the state of Arkansas today. The folks that are on the front line of that work need you to mobilize your networks in support of that work and get behind it and help amplify it. Organize. Organize behind a call to action and center the voices of the most impacted communities. And finally, re-envision a different version of public safety that is not tethered to the status quo of arrest and incarcerate and instead focuses on opportunity and community well-being. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.